One of the most important lessons life has taught me is this: trust is a weapon. Place it in the wrong hands, and sooner or later, it will be turned against you. My name is Derek Mason.
Once, I was a soldier. Later, a businessman.
My world was built on discipline, strategy, and loyalty, principles that had guided me through battlefields and boardrooms alike. But there was one thing no amount of training could have prepared me for: betrayal. That night, I learned that nothing was as it seemed. The people I had called my closest friends, the ones I had built an empire with, had been conspiring behind my back. And worst of all, the woman who had stood by my side for 15 years, the woman I had loved, built a life with, raised children with, was one of them. They had miscalculated. They saw me as an obstacle, someone to be quietly removed. They mistook my trust for weakness, my silence for ignorance. But I was raised in war. My instincts had kept me alive in the most ruthless corners of the world. My job was to identify and eliminate threats. And now I had only one mission: to make them pay. That night, I sat alone in my office, the glow of Washington's city lights flickering against the window. The skyline had always been a symbol of power, of ambition, but now, it felt like a mirage.
My phone buzzed.
Don't forget, dinner with the Sullivans, the Walshes, and the Reeves tonight.
7 p.m.
It was a message from my wife, Roxanne.
I smiled.
These gatherings had become a ritual: old friends, trusted partners, good wine, easy conversations.
But deep down, something felt off.
For months, subtle discrepancies had caught my attention. Numbers in James's reports that didn't quite add up. Peter's sudden interest in matters that were none of his concern. Michael's uncharacteristic tension.
And Roxanne, especially her.
She had been different lately. The way she touched me, less and less. The way her eyes met mine, distant, guarded. She never let go of her phone. A few times when I picked it up absent-mindedly, I saw it, the slight tremble in her fingers. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Work stress, exhaustion, the slow erosion that time brings to a marriage. But a soldier never ignores his instincts on the battlefield. And I wasn't about to start now. By 7, I arrived home. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, expensive and familiar. She stood before the mirror, applying the final touches to her makeup. A woman getting dressed up for a dinner party. That's normal, isn't it? But then why did it feel so different? You're early, she said, catching my gaze through the mirror.
I loosened my tie.
Wanted to take a shower before everyone arrives. She looked away, quick, almost imperceptible, but not to me. Something shifted in my mind. When a woman gets ready, whose approval does she seek the most? Her husband's, or someone else's? A silent wall had formed between us, invisible yet impenetrable. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just in my head. By the time our guests arrived, the house was alive with conversation, laughter, the clinking of glasses. But I saw everything through a different lens now. I saw the way Roxanne's fingertips brushed Peter's arm, just for a second, just enough. I noticed how James kept glancing at his phone, tension flickering in his jaw. I caught Michael avoiding my eyes, his usual confidence chipped away by something heavier. They thought I was oblivious.
They were wrong.
For years, I had trained to outmaneuver my enemies, to anticipate threats before they emerged. I had always believed the battlefield was out there, in war zones, in boardrooms, in negotiations. But tonight, I realized the battlefield was right here. And it was time to plan my next move. They thought they could outplay me. They thought betrayal would break me. They forgot who I was. I am Derek Mason. And soon, they will learn the price of crossing me. If you want to take down a strong man, you start by finding his weakness. That's what they had tried to do. But they had overlooked one thing. My weakness was the very thing that made me stronger. As the night unfolded, the air thick with laughter and feigned camaraderie, I remained silent. Sometimes, silence is the most dangerous weapon of all. James kept glancing at his phone.
Did he think I wouldn't notice?
He had no idea I could read a man's nervous tells better than he could read his own reflection.
Peter
was looking at Roxanne with too much focus, too much intent. A man doesn't look at a woman like that unless he wants something he shouldn't.
And Roxanne, she was too careful, too poised.
Like someone walking a tightrope, praying not to fall. They didn't know it yet. But they had already fallen. He had seen her like that more times than he should have. And Michael, his hands trembled as he reached for his glass, the nervous energy rolling off him like a tide. He had been the last to realize the depth of the betrayal, the last to understand what he had truly gotten himself into. But now, as the weight of it settled in, he finally saw it for what it was.
Too late.
As the evening wore on, the roles at the table became clearer. Roxanne played the careful host, her smile measured, her gestures calculated. She kept an even distance from everyone, never lingering too long, never letting her guard slip. But sometimes, the biggest secret is revealed by the one who tries too hard to appear normal.
I watched. I smiled.
But inside, the storm was gathering strength. I had made my decision. I would see this through to the end. The next morning, I sat in my office, the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Before me lay the latest financial reports, neat columns of numbers arranged in deceptive order. I examined everything with surgical precision. There, small adjustments, subtle shifts, barely perceptible unless you knew exactly what to look for. James had been careful. He thought his manipulations in accounting were too minor to raise suspicion, that his siphoning of funds would go unnoticed. He had underestimated me. I moved to Peter's communication records. A meeting months ago, hidden beneath layers of encryption and vague scheduling notes. The CEO of a competing defense company. The conversation was coded, but I was once a man who specialized in deciphering codes. And then there was Roxanne. That morning, she left her phone on the table for only a moment. I could have taken it, scrolled through messages, searched for proof.
But I didn't.
Instead, I looked at myself in the mirror. I had once been an intelligence officer. I had interrogated men who had killed for money, had looked into the faces of traitors and watched them weave their lies. But I had never felt betrayal this close. I knew she was part of it. But knowing wasn't enough. Suspicion only makes a man angry.
Proof, however, makes him act.
And I was ready to act. I made one call. Taylor Rodriguez. A former agent, an old friend, now a private investigator. A man who knew how to find the truth buried beneath layers of deception.
I have a job for you, I said. His voice was calm, amused.
Who do you need me to follow?
My wife. 3 friends.
And their dirty secrets. There was a brief silence.
Then a low chuckle.
Sounds like a big job, Mason.
Not big, I thought. Just a war.
A war against the people who tried to ruin my life.
For 3 weeks, I became a shadow. I watched. I waited.
And one by one, their secrets unraveled. James, his hidden debts surfaced like rot beneath polished wood. $3 million in gambling losses. He had been desperate, making mistakes, reaching for anything to keep himself afloat. And desperate men were the easiest to break. Peter, his betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. He hadn't just been meeting with competitors. He had sold them my company's proprietary data, the very foundation of everything I had built. He had taken the trust one placed in him and auctioned it off to the highest bidder. Michael, the man I had once stood beside in battle, the man I had called a brother. He had been selling internal information, feeding outsiders the intelligence that could cripple us from within. He had switched sides without hesitation. And then there was Roxanne. What I learned about her made all the other betrayals seem almost forgivable. She had been with all of them.
James. Peter. Michael. Different times.
Different places.
The same words. The same lies.
She played them all the way she had played me. They thought they could deceive me. Thought they could manipulate me. They forgot one thing. I am a man who has survived war.
And now, it was my turn.
That night, I sat in silence and let the weight of the truth settle in. I thought about every laugh they had shared over dinner, every toast they had raised, every false word that had passed between them. Every fake greeting.
Every lie.
They had been the closest people in my life.
My friends. My partner.
The ones I had trusted the most. And now, they had united against me. But they had made a mistake. They chose the wrong man to betray. As I looked into their eyes, the men I once called friends, the woman I once called love, I no longer saw the people they used to be. They were no longer my allies, my confidants. They were my enemies. But what they didn't know was that I had become theirs too. And I show no mercy to my enemies. The trap was set. They had spent months plotting my downfall, weaving their deception with careful precision, believing they were the masterminds of my demise. But they never realized I had been watching, tracking every move, every whisper, every betrayal. They thought they were playing a game. They didn't know I had already won. Rodriguez had prepared everything: evidence, recordings, photographs. The truth, meticulously documented, irrefutable. I handed it all over to FBI agent Samantha Torres. This was no longer just about vengeance. This was about justice. That evening, there was another dinner. But this time, it was different. James, Peter, Michael, and Roxanne sat around the table, oblivious, believing they were on the verge of victory. They thought this was the final act of their grand deception, the night they would bury me for good. They had no idea they were already standing at the edge of their own graves. I raised my glass, my voice smooth, unwavering.
To friendship and loyalty. They smiled.
They lifted their glasses.
Fools.
At that moment, the massive screen in the dining hall flickered to life. One by one, the evidence began to play. First, James, his money laundering records, the hidden debts, the gambling losses that had driven him to desperation. His face turned pale, his grip tightening around his glass. Then Peter, documents revealing his secret meetings with rival companies, the transactions that proved his betrayal. The color drained from his face as he dropped his glass, the shatter echoing in the silence. Michael, the trusted friend who had sold company secrets, thinking no one would ever find out. The look in his eyes said it all. He knew it was over. And finally, Roxanne.
The videos.
The messages. The whispers behind closed doors. Proof of how she had played all three of them, feeding them the same lies, spinning the same web of manipulation. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She had always been strong, always composed. But now, stripped of her power, of her control, she was nothing more than a woman standing at the edge of ruin. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, voice barely audible over the pounding silence. I leaned in, locking eyes with her. "Because you deserve it."
The doors burst open.
FBI agents stormed in. James bolted for the exit, but they tackled him to the ground. He struggled, shouting, but desperation wouldn't save him now. Peter screamed that he was innocent, that he had been set up, but the evidence spoke louder than his lies. Michael said nothing.
There was no point.
He knew there was no escaping this.
And Roxanne, she didn't fight. She didn't plead.
She just stared at me, 1,000 unspoken words in her eyes. 15 years of marriage.
Gone.
15 years of friendship.
Ended. For them, it was the end.
For me, it was a new beginning. 1 year later, Mason Digital Defense recorded the highest profits in its history. The company flourished, stronger than ever. And this time, I was surrounded only by those I could trust. James, once a man of power, rotted in prison, his life shattered by the very gambling addiction that had driven him to betray me. Peter, stripped of his law license, lost everything he had spent his life building. Michael, the man who had once stood at my side, would spend the rest of his days behind bars. And Roxanne, her punishment was the worst of all. She had spent her life fighting for power, for control.
Now, she had none.
And I was the one who took it from her. That night, I raised one final glass.
Betrayal comes at a price.
A price higher than any of them had ever imagined. And for a man like me, forgiveness is never an option.